thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
And thanks to everyone for joining us. I'm here with filmmaker Maggie Burnette Stogner to talk about her film Unbreathable. And it is an incredible film. We're going to be playing pieces of the film and talking about it and also answering your questions. So please put questions in the chat. Unbreathable was executive produced by the Center for Environmental Filmmaking at American University with support from the American Lung Association and American University's Center for Environmental Policy and the Hanley Foundation. And I had a wonderful conversation with you preceding this moment. Maggie Stogner is the founder of Blue Bear Films, also worked for 9 years at National Geographic, where you produced and directed numerous documentaries. And I know you have award-winning work in a lot of areas, including The Greeks, Real Pirates, Afghanistan, Adventures of Archaeology and Roads of Arabia, and now really focused on environmental health and teaching students about working on whatever they want to bring to the screen. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here. You know, I took on the Center for Environmental Filmmaking at AU about 3.5 years ago, and it was very much driven by the crisis we're facing today with our climate. I mean, we just have to figure out how to engage different audiences, how to engage the public. And much as I love doing cultural films and working in different places around the world, this was just so critical that we really get together and figure out, how do we engage people? How do we get people really motivated and mobilized and ready to really jump in and come together around, the shared values of things like clean air. It seems pretty simple, but there's a lot of work to be done. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this should be for all high school students, all college students, just as kind of a primer on clean air. I mean, to think that you couldn't see the sky and all the work that has been done and also that needs to be done, that we have yet to do.
I absolutely, I wish everybody would watch it, because I think it's, you can extrapolate from Unbreathable so many other, different issues we're dealing with, but air is something we all share. I mean, that's why we open the film with, each of us take at least 20,000 breaths a day. That's what keeps us living, and we share that air. And whether we're, over here or over there, we all have to think about what that clean air for everyone means, and that environmental justice component. As one person in the film says, it's not like the air just stays here. It does move. I mean, we found that out with acid rain, because that was a discovery back in the day when people realized that the plants in the US and, that air was traveling up to the Northeast and into Canada and causing significant damage. So we're all in this together. And I think that was the main goal for Unbreathable, the fight for healthy air, is to really figure out how to inform, educate, and then engage and mobilize. And so we took a lot of different components, the policy, the milestones of the Clean Air Act. It was 50 years of the Clean Air Act 2 years ago, and interwove those with the personal stories that really humanize what that issue is. And we had talked about the other day that, it's overwhelming. We get so many gloom and doom stories and so much information, and that you just want to go and hide in a corner somewhere,
Right.
And it's just hard. And, it's, so how do you break that down and really look for ways we can come together? And one of the things that I saw recently that I thought made so much sense is, one way to deal with climate anxiety is climate action. And so if we can come together and act and feel like, this can make a difference, which it can. I mean, we see that over and over again when communities really come together, then we're on the right road. We're on the right path.
Yes. Organize.
Mm.
And you have some great examples in your movie. I'd like to share a clip of the trailer just to start things out.
Before the Clean Air Act was in place, we literally had cities that you could be in and you could look up and not see the sun.
You saw the cars smelling terrible, and so the pollution was a visceral experience.
We know that long-term low-level exposure to polluted air is unhealthy.
1969 was the year of the landing on the moon. You had sort of a collective attitude.
Surely we can move confidently now to achieve a better, more peaceful life for our fellow humans.
Action to clean things up may have begun in Washington on this Earth Day.
There are few pieces of legislation that affect everything you do all day, like breathe.
Whenever there were efforts to change, roll back, stop advances, environmental protection, it has been the health issue that has rallied people.
If it's about you, your family, your kids, you will demand that the federal government step up.
It's a human right to breathe clean air, and that right is being violated right now.
We have implored DuPont to at least reach what EPA says is a safe level. They have refused to do it.
Neighbors near the Clairton Coke Works showing just how frustrated they are.
Who is tracking our health and what system is in place?
There's a problem in Clairton, but there's a problem all around this area because this pollution travels.
It takes government at the federal and the state level. It takes business and industry throughout the country, and it takes citizens pushing in the right direction.
Sorry.
That's all right. That's that little, because we're distributed through New Day Films, so that's the little logo with the sound from New Day Films. Okay. which is a fantastic co-op that's been around for about 50 years, founded by a group of feminists back in the day. One of them, Julia Reichardt, who won the Oscar for Best Documentary for her film American Factory. So it's a very, a lot of passionate filmmakers creating films to really try to make a difference in the world. Yeah, great group.
Okay, great. And you can go to New Day Films and watch the other movies that way, or is that for educational purposes as well?
New Day Films is educational, grassroots, community organizing. So you can go and watch the trailers of the different films, and if there are any films there, there's a number of different social issues, environmental issue films, as well as just some personal films, some more experimental, some more it's an interesting collection. Yeah, I encourage everybody, check out New Day Films. It's just newday.com.
Okay, great. And that was a great trailer.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a great team on this film. Really excellent team. Elizabeth HERZFELDT-KAMPRATH is the co-producer. And wow, we just had a really wonderful team working on the film, as well as our partners, American Lung Association. We met weekly with American Lung Association and the Center for Environmental Policy, and just kept working on what stories, what information, what is most important here to really engage people without overwhelming them, and being able to access some of the early policymakers from the 1970s who put this into play. And really, I love that Tom Jorling said, you know, if we can get somebody on the moon, we should be able to achieve clean air for everybody. And, you know, I think that's, you know, we were able to talk to some very inspiring and interviews with some very inspiring people. Gina McCarthy, love her accent, but she's such a fighter, you know, she's in the Biden administration now. These are people who've spent their lives really fighting for clean air policy and stronger regulations. The issue for many communities is the lack of enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you talked about in the film how it's been enforced in some areas and not in others.
Yeah.
And you also brought up something that when I got into environmental health, really found really important that I wasn't aware of, which was the link between air pollution and dementia. And not just, we think about lung cancer, but it's so much more than lung cancer. Heart attacks, dementia, respiratory, getting more sick, and also, of course, asthma.
Yeah, and that was a learning. I didn't realize that. I mean, it's, asthma is one of the, if not the biggest syndrome with children, and that's what I associated it with, and I remember going to visit my grandparents in Los Angeles when I was a kid, and just like my eyes would run, and we were just like gasping for breath. Some days it was so bad. I never saw the mountains back then. I mean, you go to LA and you could just barely see, and you could taste it. I mean, it's what Mary Nichols said, the air resource lawyer that's done decades of work, but you could taste it, and it just was that bad, and you could feel it in your lungs. And so I always associated air pollution with lungs. So it was a learning curve. And then right around the time we were finishing the film, came out some research that linked much stronger cases of COVID and deaths from COVID because of air pollution. And that too was just shocking that air pollution could have that kind of influence.
Yeah. And I remember when the WHO came out saying it was carcinogenic air pollution. It was a few years ago now, perhaps. And they had this grand number of how many hundreds of thousands of people had died. So it's after the bodies are counted that we have then that kind of determination.
Yeah.
And so such a road to go. Well, so I have a few more clips. Do you want to introduce this is the Louisiana Cancer Alley?
Yeah. This was a really key scene in my mind, was to help people understand just how devastating air pollution is, particularly in vulnerable communities. And in Cancer Alley, they've been fighting this for 40 years. And there are, the Denka DuPont plant and others that do not enforce or do not meet the standards, the EPA standards. The local officials don't push those companies to really meet the standards. And so you have this, community of people that are really hard hit. And so we really wanted to have that story in the film to really help viewers understand just how devastating it could be. So this is the clip from that story.
This girl, Sylvia's mom, was living here. She died with cancer. This guy right here died with cancer. This lady right here, she's sick, but she don't have cancer. Her husband died with cancer. This lady right here, she has cancer.
In 1969, a year before the Clean Air Act was signed into law, chemical giant DuPont Denka announced it would produce neoprene at its plant in Louisiana's St. John the Baptist Parish, west of New Orleans.
This girl right here, Carol Lennox. Carol Lennox and I went to pre-K all the way through high school and remained friends all our lives. And when she died, took something out of me because I knew how hard she had suffered. She had so many illnesses all of her married life. In fact, she had even filed a suit against Denka years back before we even thought about what was going on, because she and her kids were sick. And she knew it was the plant that was doing it to it.
Reserve is in a cloud that you can't see the sun through. I think the spirit of people in reserve feel they have this defeated feeling that's almost innate.
In December 2015, the EPA released its National Air Toxics Assessment, and that assessment revealed that Census Tract 708, where the Denka facility sits, the residents of that tract have the highest risk in the country of getting cancer from air pollution. And the National Air Toxics Assessment also determined that that risk of getting cancer from air pollution is coming from chloroprene, which is a chemical that is really only emitted by the Denka facility.
I was 4 when they started emitting chloroprene, to my knowledge. And I know that my generation, we started suffering with allergies. My brother had nephrotic syndrome, kidney disease, and our children, they were all born with asthma, upper respiratory problems all the time. So it was like the next generation just got worse.
The rate of cancer has been so high for so many years around the DuPont Denka plant that people call this area Cancer Alley.
DuPont Denka! Stop killing our babies! DuPont Denka! Stop killing our babies! DuPont Denka! Stop killing our babies! We have implored DuPont to at least reach what EPA says is a safe level. They have refused to do it. And based on that, they need to stop production. We need to have them shut down since they refuse to respect our lives enough.
Concerned Citizens of St. John is an organization that was formed to fight the environmental injustice of our parish.
We need them to stop producing the neoprene that causes the release of chloroprene, or they need to come down to the levels suggested by EPA. They need to meet the guidelines, or they need to shut it down. And it's not going to devastate this parish like we've been told, or people are led to believe, because in essence, it's not really supporting the community that it's in.
And the street next to, on the fence line of the plant, there's more vacant houses, I think, any of the streets here. These people are just dying, and nobody's going to move back in there. We can't sell our homes, because who want to buy a home in Cancer Alley when everybody's dying out? Nobody want to come back and live here. So all we want the plants to do is make it safe for us so that we can live here.
Well, these acres now are toxic. And it's not fair for people who only have a little to hold on to. And our lives mean nothing, because as long as we're a small minority community, we don't really matter. It's devastating. It's heartbreaking.
That just chokes me up every time. Sadly, the gentleman that is speaking at the rally has since passed away of cancer. It's just never ending there. On a brighter note, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, and this was something I learned in the making of this film, is that there's a citizens law component to the Clean Air Act. The first time that's ever actually been embedded into a regulatory act like that. The problem is that it takes lawyers, it takes money to hire the lawyers to actually organize a lawsuit using the Citizens Act. And but finally, there have been a group that have stepped up and are representing different people in Cancer Alley and the community to use the Citizens Act to force the policy officials to really enforce those regulations that should just be enforced, followed in the first place. So hopefully that goes through, and the Denka plant will do what they should have been doing all along, which is making sure that the community is safe.
So they were not going to the EPA's recommended standards, as the man who was wearing the red was saying, and they can sue the EPA?
It's a component of the Clean Air Act where if citizens feel that they are not getting the level of clean air in their community that they should, they can sue to have the EPA and the regulatory officials in that area to force the plant. It gives them an extra. Well, it's a settlement. It's a lawsuit. And it'll be in the works for a long time, I'm sure. But it is one of the hopeful signs, I think, in the Clean Air Act, is that there is a tool there to use, and if communities can organize, and if there are lawyers available who can help, push that forward, then that is one path of action. And there are others, because a lot of times it just takes the community being able to mobilize and coming together and putting pressure. But somebody has to respond to that. And the Denka plant has been non-responsive for decades.
How did they even get away with that? Just not responding? I mean, it's egregious.
Yeah, and sadly, there are certain states, because the enforcement comes down to state by state. And if the EPA regulatories at the state level are not enforcing because they're pro-corporate or whatever it is, that's how that happens. And the story that we did near Pittsburgh, there was a Coke manufacturing plant refinery there. And they, one of their major scrubbers went out, and they didn't inform the community, and that community already has a huge high rate of asthma, and all of a sudden people were getting really sick, and it just kind of kept going for months without informing the community about what was going on. They didn't shut the plant down. They kept the plant running even though they had a major malfunction in the plant, driving a huge number of people in that community to the hospital. So, these are things that they have to be at the local level, at the regional level, at the state level. It's not just that we have these federal regulations. That's not enough. That's where the community, organizing comes really into play, because and that happened finally in the community with the Coke plant. They just kept coming into City Hall and making public statements and really pushing hard, and finally the plant responded, but it took several months.
Wow.
Yeah. Frustrating.
It's like at every level of government, we might not have laws that are fully protective, and then getting them to be enforced at all of these different levels. It seems like a Herculean job, but here we have examples of people who are accomplishing that. And I have infinite hope.
I do too. I'm an eternal optimist. And I do know, because we see it. And the last clip you have is a story, because we wanted to end the film on a more hopeful note, is a success story of a community coming together. And should I talk about that now? Do you want to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. It's in Baltimore. I live just down the road from Baltimore. And if you drive into Baltimore, you see these huge incinerators, and they've been there for a long time, and they burn medical products and all sorts of gross stuff and spew it into the air. And this high school in Curtis Bay, just on the city limits of Baltimore, found out that there was an incinerator that had been approved to be built just a mile from their school. The school board even approved it. It brings jobs. It brings, it's the same old, it'll help the economy of our poor neighborhood here, and it'll bring jobs, and a group of high school kids got together and said, no, we're not going to stand for this. And they organized the entire community to stand up against this. It took them 3 years. They formed an organization called Free Your Voice. Shishwanda was 15 at the time. I mean, and Destiny, the other co-founder of Free Your Voice, I think she was maybe 16, and they just rallied the entire community and said, we are not, don't do this to us. This is not acceptable. And one of the things that I found out later, because on a panel with Shishwanda, was that community actually has, she said the community has a lifespan that's 15 years shorter than the wealthier white community zip code up the road. because of the number of different pollution factors in the community. I mean, there are probably other factors too, but that's a major one. And these incinerators are not well regulated in that city at all.
The students formed a community action group called Free Your Voice.
Is it fair to build the nation's largest incinerator in a community with the highest level of toxic air emissions in the state? Is it fair to have your life cut short because of where you're born? We say that it's not fair, that it's not right. The incinerator is failed development.
After 3 years of campaigning, Free Your Voice convinced Baltimore City not to build the incinerator.
We have a role of standing up for our community, whether it's us coming together when we can and really fighting back like we have been doing. That's the role that we've been put in, and that's what we did back then. Now we're coming up with solutions.
This is our future, you know? We have to take care. We see things in a different way. We have a cleaner vision and a way better vision.
If people can see that youth are capable of doing something or being part of something greater or a greater cause, something that will benefit not just us, but like our neighborhoods, our planet, the air, everything.
When we come together, we can win. And that there is no problem that's bigger than us. Because when we all come together, we're pretty big. We want the best for our kids and our futures. And so, to get that vision, we have to fight for it.
Great. So are they working on something now for your
Yeah,
voice?
they're continuing to do the community work, and you know it's never ending. I mean, there's just holding the existing incinerator companies accountable is part of the project, but it's any number of things, and part of it is just trying to make sure that the community keeps coming together and is aware and insisting on transparency from, you know, those companies that are polluting, and city council and the school board and, you know, all the different layers. And so I think I'm waiting for Shashwanda to run for office when she gets a little older. She'll be yeah. She's a really dynamite.
Yeah, I was thinking, how do we get her on our team? I mean, go, fantastic.
Yeah.
So what stories, I have a couple questions I want to ask. Actually, let me go to the questions first, and then I'll ask you after that, what stories you weren't able to include in the film that you, you know, maybe filmed or thought about. And
yeah,
I'm sure there are many. Nancy says, as a person who deals with significant lung damage that occurred early in life, I know just how important the subject of clean air is. Your documentary so covered this subject succinctly and passionately as well. I've recommended it to numerous people, and I agree it should be required viewing in high schools, colleges, and to parents. And Jerry asks, yeah, I'm curious whether any of the DENCA employees got sick, and if so, was it covered by DENCA?
That is an excellent question, and I do not know the answer to that. I would assume, because they all live in the community, that yes. And there were a number of people that we interviewed in that community, and who had children who had ended up in the hospital, had to keep their children inside. It's a company town, so yes, I would have to assume that there were employees that got sick. Whether or not they got sick because of being in the plant versus just being in the community, I don't know. But.
And neoprene is, I feel like I know what neoprene is. Isn't it kind of plastic that's used for something?
Yeah, and it's in wetsuits. It's actually in a lot of things. Yeah, and it's in more and more in the clothing and some of the synthetic clothing that has been popular over the last 10 years. Yeah.
And also in the little outsides that now I remember what it was when I was getting a case for my daughter's iPad. It was neoprene. So it's that kind of like thick plastic that, that you can get everywhere. So what stories weren't you able to tell?
You know, the hard part about making any film like this is that the stories in the film are everywhere in the country. And there's so many different stories. And it's really hard to say, okay, we're going to just do this story and that's it. We've tried very hard to have stories in different parts of the country to represent different, different geographic communities. But there were, and then originally we were going to film and make this an hour, but COVID happened and we thought, wow, we better just finish with what we have. And I'm glad actually a half an hour has worked really well in the virtual environment that we screen in these days. And it makes it more accessible for classrooms as well. But what I'm hoping is that anybody who shares this film, watches this film with their community, that they really think about what stories are in their own community. That this is just a jumping off point. It's just a catalyst for talking about bringing people together and talking about the issues in their own communities, because we see them everywhere. And there's not a state around, even in rural communities, you'd think, oh yeah, there's clean air there. Well, no, actually there's, the pesticide use and fertilizers and as we talked about earlier, pollution travels and now we have things like wildfires and the climate crisis, and that's really pushing issues with air pollution. And we saw, even on the East Coast, we saw that mapping of that brown smoke that came from the West Coast all the way across the United States. So, as we see things get worse, we're going to have to just push all that much harder to make sure the regulations are enforced and that we actually expand on the regulations we have today. There are certain things that aren't covered under the Clean Air Act, microplastics. And if you track, there's what's going on right now. One thing I see in a lot of different environmental health blogs is that we are basically, I'm not sure if I'm going to get this exactly right, but we have something like a credit card worth of plastic a week coming into our bodies. And now I don't hold me to that exact, but the idea is that we do have this. I do know, I read a report the other day, we have plastic in our bloodstreams now. So what's regulating microplastics in our air? Nothing right now. We have the forever chemicals, the neoprene and other new chemicals that aren't being regulated. So we can't just stay still on this. We have to move forward and keep casting forward. I think one thing that I would say, and I learned this from my kids, is, they're very much don't buy new stuff. Just let's reuse the environmentally friendly products of, that are already around that can be used over, and we don't need to keep buying these new products with new synthetics, with different, manufacturing processes that contribute to worsening air. Yeah.
Right. Not buying new as much as possible. I know that when we had a situation with artificial turf near my house, and I started working on that for a long time, I was able to get the playgrounds to replace the shredded tire with the wood, but the playground right in front of my house that I had worked so hard on, they did the poured in place, which is where they, rather than the wood. But a friend of mine who didn't understand the specifics of the science much, but she just looked at me and she said, Mother Nature knows best. That's how I do things, Theodora.
Well, that's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. Keep it natural.
Just like when in doubt, is it natural? Well, of course, natural is a word that's been taken over, but Yeah, so many things. Do you have any other recommendations for people on the call about things that they can do?
Yeah, well, on our website, so Unbreathable, just unbreathable.org, we have a number of toolkits that have been provided through the American Lung Association and other partners and other organizations that we've organized screenings with over the last couple of years. We also did a series of webinars. We were going to have a big symposium with the Center for Environmental Policy and the American Lung Association, but because of COVID, we weren't able to do that. So instead, there were a series of webinars, virtual webinars organized. So some of those are on the website as well. So people are interested in certain, you know, COVID, for instance, the COVID air pollution situation. And so I think looking for local organizations that you can work with is really important. It's hard to just kind of start out by yourself. So finding those local organizations that you can, you know, Sierra Club in Maryland, for instance, has 80,000 members. They screen the film and have different programs going. So I think it's about coming together in different ways, making sure you understand the issues in your local community. And we never, ever have enough time in the day. So really being selective about, oh, this is the most egregious issue in the community. So let's really focus on that, because we can't do everything. There's just not enough hours in the day. And I think the other thing is just to be super aware of, this is a fight for clean air for everybody. And so making sure that the communities that are really struggling are getting extra help.
Mm-hmm. Well, what has been the impact that you found from the film? And like, you talked about the Sierra Club and having screenings, and actually I was looking for the trailer and I came across some of these. They were entitled Unbreathable. And then I started watching this whole conversation happening that I think was one of them. But what can you tell me more about that? It's been a few years.
Yeah. It came out in June of 2020 with the DC Environmental Film Festival.
Okay.
And then we've been in a number of different festivals. United Nations Association Film Festival does a human rights festival every year. We were in that. And in a lot of environmental film festivals, American Conservation Film Festival, oh my gosh, Colorado Environmental Film Festival. I mean, just tick all the environmental film festivals. But importantly, I think there are a lot of different health organizations that have organized screenings with the film. And recently, just a couple of weeks ago, there was let's see if I'm going to remember the exact acronym. The name was Medical Professions, Nurses for Public Health, something. And I hadn't heard of this organization, but it's national groups of nurses across the country who are advocating for stronger public health. And so it's groups like that, the US Climate Action Network, which is again a whole, they bring together a lot of different organizations. So we did a big event with them, and then these different organizations that participated then did events, and it's kind of like that concentric circle that goes out. Eco America, which is a faith-based national organization. So it's been interesting. It's been very organic in how the film has just kind of taken off and been used by a number of different organizations, health, advocacy, environmental. And it just keeps going. It's surprising to me that 2 years later, we're still doing screenings, every month. And
that's great.
Yeah. So I have to think that there's some good impact there. I wish we had better ways of analyzing and the analytics and all that stuff. But as long as we're still getting requests, I just got a request this morning by a group in Detroit. So, it just keeps going.
That's fabulous.
Yeah. So I'm pleased it can be used that way. It seems to be effective. And so, yeah. Hopefully it just continues. I see somebody in the chat put the credit card comparison.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so bad.
Right. So bad. It is equal to the weight of a credit card.
Yeah. And, every week. Oof.
We inhale 2,000 microplastics each week. Yeah.
And we don't even really know the long-term effect of that. You know, I mean, what does that add up to after a year or 5 years or 10 years? What does that mean? I'm a new grandma. I have a 2.5-month-old granddaughter, and I'm thinking, what does that mean for her? You know, where is she going to be when she's 20 or 25 or 30, dealing with health issues because of what she's breathing now that she has no control over?
Mm-hmm. And eating, or will eat.
Yeah.
2.5, so she's eating.
Her parents are really careful.
The fish.
But yeah, you know, I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing. You know, speaking of fish, I'm going to bring up my film I'm working on right now, which is good segue. But for this last year, we've been working on a new film called Upstream Downriver. This year is the 50-year anniversary of the Clean Water Act. And we felt like that was a good jumping off point for doing something on water. And, you know, that's as ubiquitous and essential to our well-being as air. And it has about the same track record. A report just came out by the UN just a month or two ago that 50+% of the waterways in the US are unswimmable, undrinkable, unfishable, and unlivable for aquatic life. I mean, that's just unbelievable, that 50%. And again, it's hitting poor communities of color, vulnerable communities all across the United States. And it's an enforcement issue yet again, because some states are really great. I mean, California, great on air, setting higher standards all the time. Progressive on water, still have a huge ag runoff problem, you know, but they're pushing those standards, and then you have states like Louisiana again, where they have huge coal ash sludge that just comes right into the waterways, and the EPA officials say, yeah, sure, just cap them, that'll make them go away. And all it does is pushes them down into the water tables. So, you know, we still have the same issues, those enforcement issues. It's state by state, it's regional, it's local, and communities really need to come together and work together to make sure that there's clean water for everyone. And we have a website, I'll just put it in the chat, but it's www.upstreamdownriver.org.
And so many people are dependent on water for food.
Yes,
you know,
for food. And, you know, we look at, and again, there's certain things that the Clean Water Act does not cover yet. And water scarcity is one of those. And our groundwater tables are going lower and lower. But we're working with Doug Progost and the Water Resource Director of the Sioux Tribe in Standing Rock. And their community has a huge water scarcity problem. And that came to light with COVID, just how many Native American communities across our country are dealing with really serious water scarcity, lack of just basic wastewater, processing. And, you know, it's, and you kind of think, wait a minute, in our country, how can that really? But yeah. And, you know, the Clean Water Act did a tremendous amount of infrastructure work in putting wastewater plants into place all across the country. I mean, it was truly significant, but there's so much more work still to be done. And so we're working on this film in the same way we did Unbreathable, hoping it'll be a good, strong catalyst for mobilizing communities and inspiring action. So we should have something done by the end of September, because we have a symposium coming up.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, September 29th, the date was just announced. So the Center for Environmental Policy will be organizing that. And our partners are American Rivers and the Clean Water for All Consortium, which is National Wildlife Federation, all the way to some small, just waterkeeper, riverkeeper organizations. And we have some great stories. Fred Tutman is the Patuxent riverkeeper here in Maryland, which is a very long watershed. And he's the only African-American riverkeeper in the United States. And his ancestors go back 7 generations, some of the first freed slaves in Maryland along the Patuxent River. And he's out on that river every day, just, you know, witnessing and reporting where violations are happening, getting the community involved, getting volunteers involved, providing public statement. It's every day. It's a lifelong commitment for him.
Wow. Tell us about the River Keepers. Is that like you become like?
Yeah, they're amazing. So the River Keepers are really an organization. So there's usually one person in charge, and then it's all volunteers, and they work to really just keep aware of what's going on the river. So the Potomac River, for instance, which is a larger river, they have a network of river keepers. With the Columbia River, a network of river keepers, a lot of tributaries. So you get different river keepers on different tributaries. And the goal is to organize volunteers, organize communities to really keep track of what's going on along the river. And then they do cleanups as well. And sadly, those cleanups are like thousands of plastic bottles and, you know, but they're usually an annual or sometimes quarterly. The LA River Keeper organizations are doing, I think, quarterly, maybe even more frequently than that. So it's so they're wonderful organizations. I encourage everybody to check out the local River Keeper organization. And then there are also water keeper organizations. So Chesapeake Bay, for instance, has a water keeper organization. It's a larger consortium. Yeah.
Great.
That's a great way to get involved. Yeah.
Yeah. And the website again for Upstream.
It's upstreamdownriver.org. Yeah.
And I know that
whatever happens up there is going to affect downriver, you know. Yeah.
Right. And so are you going to do sort of something similar where you give that history of the Clean Water Act and then give some examples of how far we've come and how far we need to go?
Yes, exactly. And we have stories we're developing, just one in Alabama, one with Fred. We have the Snake River, which is a tributary of the Columbia River. There's an interesting story there where there's been a big fight to remove 4 dams because the water levels are dropping so much that the water temperature is going higher and higher. That is actually covered under the Clean Water Act, heat pollution or thermal pollution. And the salmon die on their way up to spawn. So it's killing off the salmon. It's pretty regular at this point. So we're working with the Nez Perce tribe in Idaho in the Snake River. So there's stories everywhere. It's really hard to, you know, just narrow it down to which stories are we going to include in the film. But, you know, hopefully they're stories that inspire and empower and represent different facets of the issue and different solutions. I think it's so important to have solutions. You know, we can't just point our fingers and say, see how terrible that is, because we know it's terrible. Maybe we don't know quite how terrible it is. I mean, that hopefully the film informs about that as well. But and understanding the context and the history, I think is really important, but also looking at, and there are some really interesting solutions, both on the air front and the waterfront.
Thank you. And I know that you're fundraising as well. So if anyone wants to support the film, how do they do that?
Just go to upstreamdownriver.org and you'll see a donate button. Our fiscal sponsor is Women in Film and Video, but the button on the website will take you right there. And we would so appreciate any donations. We really, we're on a roll, but we definitely need more funding to tell the stories, those personal stories.
Great. And so if you could tell us just a little bit about the Center for Environmental Filmmaking as well. I've never heard of that actually. Is how many of you are there in the United States or worldwide? And
there are very few that really focus specifically on environmental filmmaking. And this was founded in 2005. We have a program that's dedicated for graduate students to environmental and wildlife filmmaking, and we've expanded that out to really focus on environmental justice and climate justice as well. And it provides the students an opportunity to really become the next, you know, kind of leaders of communication and storytelling that can really engage the public. And we're in a very fragmented media landscape now. So understanding how to do that, how to tell really strong stories, compelling stories that, you know, that connect on a human level, but how to also reach very specific, you know, the TikTok demographic or the, you know, I mean, there are lots of different demographics now and different kinds of ways. I would say lots of opportunities for different ways to tell stories that can engage. So that's something we have a research project, an impact media research project that's funded by HHMI, Tanglebank Studios. It really is looking at those different ways to engage, not just in the distribution, but even emotional tone. Like some people really do respond to gloom and doom, but a lot of people respond more to curiosity or, you know, or awe or something where, you know, you feel like, wow, remember how beautiful water is. Remember how peaceful it is to sit just next to that stream and just listen to it. And that's a way to engage a lot of people and then lead them toward, you know, some action that way. So there's many different, so that's part of what we do is looking at those different techniques. And then we just have students that are just rocking it. They go through our program and they, you know, just get out and they're doing great work. Great, really very proud of them.
That's fabulous. So important to tell these stories. Stories is how we, I think, we reach and move mountains.
Yeah, absolutely. It's at the core.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And I hope that if you haven't seen this film, that you watch it and go to New Day as well. There's other films there, and Upstream Downriver is what's coming. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure talking with you. And I really appreciate everybody who joined us today. And yes, check out both unbreathable.org and upstreamdownriver.org. And thank you again. This was lovely.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Bye-bye to everyone. Thanks for supporting us. And we look forward to the next film, which is Something is in the Air, about cell phone radiation, coming up next week. Thank you.